So I apologize for any confusion. Uh, so my name is Rustin Reed, and welcome to week 4 on interpreting EDA results. I appreciate that, Adi. I'm sorry if I say your name wrong. Um, you can probably tell so I'm not going to share my camera today. I'm recovering from respiratory illness, and um, anyway, and this is going to be a shortened version, I guess you could say, of our normal topic because I messed up the time zones. The Anyway, so let's talk about interpreting. Oh, thank you for the well wishes. We'll talk about our topic. So this is going to be week 4 of the 5-week series, interpreting our results. Next week we'll talk about identifying our controls. But last week we looked at Expo Stats, my preferred tool, although you don't have to use Expo Stats for exposure decision analysis. I want to once again recommend the free AIHA course. There are 9 hours of video, so it's worth it's 9 contact hours, depending on who you're using for who you're recertifying with. It may be zero point 0.9 CEUs or something else, but um, it's free. It's free, and I think they did a good job. So I do recommend that course. There is also the the AIHA registry exam, which is free as well. There are almost 70 questions, 68 questions, and I highly recommend that if you complete the course, you go ahead and take the test. It's very similar in terms of the content covered. Should be able to pass that exam and become a registered EDA specialist. Uh, I I am very glad that they're doing this. I think it's a great idea, and again, I highly recommend it. So, cover our objectives for today. We'll look at the 95% UTL. So we're going to talk about our interpretation of these 3 things, and then we'll review. In our review, we're going to discuss what my recommendation is for reporting. What should you report and how you should report it? Just some of my thoughts. I don't have the exact right answer, but I'll share my opinion because people ask me. And then we'll do a quick preview for week 5. At the end of this module, you'll be able to determine the certainty and acceptability of an EDA result, determine the probability that the 95% UTL falls within a given exposure rating and control category, and interpret the exceedance fraction statistic. So first, we're going to talk about the 95% UTL. Before we look at the words you see on the screen, I know they're bolded and they're a different color. That's to draw your attention to them, but I wanted to draw your attention away for just a moment. These numbers, so this is one of the outputs from our Expo Stats. When we use the tool, we get a figure that looks kind of like this. Well, it does look like this. The columns will look different, but it will give probabilities above each of these columns. The idea here is that that is the probability that our 95% UTL falls in each of these categories. Now, on Expo Stats, it does not label the categories. It does share where they compare to the OEL. It does share where they compare to the OEL, but it does not share which category. So I've labeled that for you with these colored blocks down here. So this is category 1, or excuse me, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so when we look at this chart, we think of this in terms of probability. You could also think of it in terms of confidence. So we're 70% confident. I'm going to basically read this. We're 70% confident that the 95% UTL falls within category 2. If we were also to look at these others, we could say we're 18.3% confident that our 95% UTL falls in category 3. We're 11.2% confident that it's in category 4. That's the one that means we're above our OEL. So obviously, remember we don't want it to be there, right? We want it to be somewhere else. So This result is pretty good. We're not doing terrible. We have some room for improvement, but we're not doing too bad either. So we we'll talk about what this 70% means in terms of our confidence in just a little bit, or what the course, what AIHA calls certainty. But that that is a very important statistic right there for us to report, or excuse me, for us to pay attention to. I'm not sure I would report that one. I'll talk about what I would report. And then we so we have here another value, and I just want to focus on interpreting it. So we have these two values here. This 33.5, if you notice, so let's see, I guess I did not share what our so this is with an OEL of 100 parts per million. So our point estimate is 33.5 for our 95% UTL. That point estimate is in this category. So it kind of makes sense that this is the highest one. But I would focus on this right here. We're 70% confident that our 95% UTL falls in that category. That, as well as, which category, as well as this percentage right here, are, in my opinion, a close number one and two in terms of the most important statistics for us to report. So that's the 95% UTL. We're going to do another one just for some practice. So I would like you to interpret our result. Here, I had blue and red text. What I would like, so I'm going to go back so I can talk about this. I would just like you to report. Let me do your best to give me this interpretation. Remember, we're looking for the column that is the highest, and we're simply reporting the probability or our confidence level that our 95% UTL falls in that category. So let me move forward now. So based on this result that you see, I'd like you to interpret it and to post it in the chat. Now, this is the time to mess up. It's okay if you don't get it exactly right. That's okay. This is our chance to try and maybe fail, maybe not. Maybe you'll get it right, which is awesome. But go ahead and interpret a result based on the probability that our 95% UTL falls within a specific category. Unfortunately, Zoom doesn't show me when someone's typing, a little bubble or something, and so I can't see that. I'm guessing there may be you may be typing. Okay, awesome, awesome. So let's take a look at this. So we have our highest column is this red one, which corresponds to category 4. What we would say is that, so Adi has a good point there, and we're going to talk about that one. Although that number is what I would call the exceedance fraction. We're going to talk about that statistic in a little bit. So this one's a little bit different. So Here, what we would say is we are 68.8% confident that our 95% UTL is inside category 4. So it's saying, or you could word that a different way. You could say there is a 68.8% chance or probability that our 95% UTL is in category 4. So let me push across and it's going to give me my what I wrote before, 68.8% confident, or we could say there's a 68.8% chance that our 95% UTL falls within category 4. So these were two very different sets of data. I plugged into the tool. The number happened to be the same. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, so I mean, that was by chance. So go ahead and interpret this result. So Adi, I appreciate your participation there. Go ahead and interpret this one, and then we'll talk about it. Awesome. Oh, both of you have a similar speed there. Okay, good, good. So yes, yes. So we are 68.8% confident that our decision statistic, which is the 95% UTL, falls in category 1. So, there are different ways we could word that, but it's basically that's the probability, that's the chance that it happens to be in here. Anything that's below category 4, we're we are we're pleased to have this in any column below category 4. We don't, I guess I should use colors that are you know blue and green are not good for colorblind, the folks who are colorblind. Anyway, so now obviously the further we are this way, the better. If we are in category 0, we would love that. 1 and 2 are not bad. 3 is not great, but it's better than category 4 for sure. So we want we want the bulk of these probabilities to be below category 4. And in this case, that's where we're at, and we feel pretty good. We should feel pretty good about that result. So let's talk about what AIHA calls certainty and acceptability. I don't always use their terminology here. I guess at least for certainty, I like to just give the value, the percent, rather than the certainty. But this is all focused on category 4. I'm going to emphasize that later as well. So this is all based on that percentage in category 4. What does it show? That will tell us, well, I guess acceptability is 100% category 4. Certainty is really just whatever column it happens to be. So let's talk about that. So from our first example, we had 70% here. Now that's not quite high, but it's a good number. So AIHA would call that a medium level of certainty. The higher the number, the more certainty we have. Now, only if it was at 75% or better would we be able to call it high. So if the number in our tallest column is greater than 75%, we can say we have a high degree of certainty. If it's between 50 and 75, then we would say a medium level of certainty. And if it's low, then we, or excuse me, if it's less than 50%, then we would say a low level of certainty. Now, like I mentioned, I don't necessarily use these words when I'm reporting. Uh, Now, someone who is familiar with this process and this approach will understand, but people that I'm reporting to may not. And so I don't I normally just give the number. I give the number, and I guess I could also interpret it and add the level of certainty, but I like to just give the number. So this example is medium. So we have a medium level of confidence or certainty that the 95% UTL is in category two. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So acceptability, I think, is more important, a more important statistic here. And this is tied to what I think is probably the number one most important statistic. So I should have a slide that kind of ranks these in my opinion, but the percent in category four, in my opinion, is probably number one, the most important, and that's what we're going to look at now. The number two most important, I think, is probably our exposure rating and control category, which is these down here. Which one is our tallest column? And on this example, it's category two. So I don't know. These are both very important. It's hard for me to say one is more important than the other. There are important things about each of them, but definitely they're the top one and two most important things for us to report from our decision analysis. So, so for acceptability, we are looking at category four percentage. And so I have it highlighted with the blue there. There's really different ranges here. So less than five is acceptable. We talked about if you were able to join the first or watch the first week, we talked about that 95% UTL. Why do we pick 95% UTL? Why is that so important? Well, if if we achieve this right here, if that percentage right there is below 5%, we can say that we are 95% confident, and maybe it's more than 95%, but we're at least 95% confident that 95% of exposures are below our exposure limit. Getting to Adi's comment about worker exposures. So these are all tied together, but they're slightly different statistics. So we really, really want that number to be less than 5%. We are, that's what we're aiming for. Now, we didn't quite get that result with this set of data. I have a printer that's going to make a little beep because the job is done, but and you'll probably hear that. So 11.2% is not terrible, but it's not where we want to be. If it was below 5%, then we would call it acceptable. If it's between 5 and 30, we call it tolerable, assuming that we're going to continue monitoring, meaning we're going to take more samples. We're going to continue sampling this SEG for this exposure to add data. Now, what that's going to do is it should increase our confidence and the certainty that we have surrounding this. Hopefully, hopefully it brings that number down. There's no guarantee, but if we get more and more samples that are down here, then this will go down. If we start to get samples up here, then that's going to shift, obviously. But for sure, it's going to increase our confidence and our level of certainty as we take more samples. So tolerable, assuming we continue taking samples. And then if it's greater than 30%, we call that unacceptable. So there are times, I have seen times where, I'm going to erase my doodles, where this percent is, say, 35, but it's, or 40, but it's not my tallest column. My tallest column might be this one, and it might be 40%. And then this one here might be 30%. Well, I guess that's not possible. 25%. I've had splits that are kind of like that, where this percentage is what they would consider unacceptable, but it's not my tallest column. And that's fine. That's fine. You may get splits like that. It doesn't mean something's wrong. It just is the way it worked out for you. So if in this example where I gave 25, 40, and 35, my ERCC would be category 3. So it's most likely in category 3 because 40% is higher than 35 or 25. So category 3 is my category, but my result is still unacceptable because the number is way too high over here. Now, this is something that I would keep in mind for your reporting, and we'll take a look at the controls a little bit today and more next week. But if the result is greater than 5% or 30%, so if it's either of these, tolerable or unacceptable, monitoring is going to be one of my recommendations. So delete that, regardless of what my ERCC is, if the percent in category 4 is greater than 5%, 5 plus percent, I'll just say greater than 5%, then monitoring is going to be one of my recommendations. It doesn't matter which category I land in. If this percent right here is higher than 5, I'm going to recommend that we take more samples. So in our example here, because it landed right here between 5 and 30, because it was 11, we are saying the result is tolerable, assuming that we continue to monitor. So like I mentioned, I'm not as concerned about the certainty. We can see the certainty there. It's at 68.8%. I would have just said 68.8% for certainty. But then I'd like you to tell me, what is the acceptability? So we were just looking at that. The levels were less than 5, 5 to 30, and then greater than 30, and those are all percent. So based on that, if we have 68.8% in category 4, do we call that acceptable, tolerable, or unacceptable? Awesome. Good. Yeah. Yeah. So we are medium certainty, and and you're right. The result is unacceptable because 68.8% is greater than 30%. So we don't like that. That's not a good result. We're gonna have to do a lot of work, and next week we'll talk about the control categories and what we're gonna do about it. The so what? So what? What do we do? Well, we'll talk about that next time. So, like I mentioned, I would have just in my report, I like to just say we're 68.8% confident that it falls in that category. The result is unacceptable. We have some work to do. All right, so now with this one, the other one, I'd like you to interpret. So this is our tallest category. That's related to our certainty. And then this is our category 4. That's related to our acceptability. How would we interpret that? Remember, our cutoffs are less than 5 to 30, and then greater than 30%. Perfect. Good. Yep. Medium certainty, and it is acceptable. We have an acceptable result. So that's good. That's good. This is a much better position for us to be in if this is our result. Result is acceptable. So Adi had made a comment related to exceedance fraction, and so we're going to take a look at this now. When it comes to reporting for a client or for your employer, I I don't know exactly. I guess I'll make a recommendation here, but I'm going to help you understand what the numbers mean. But I don't think for most people, it's not going to. We don't need to dive this deeply in our reporting. We could stick to something pretty simple. So Expo Stats will give you a graph like this, and this is just one example. It says 0.215%. It'll also have some information accompanying the graph. It says the point estimate of the exceedance fraction is equal to 0.215%. So what that means, now I have the red with the red here. What that means, that point estimate is, you could call it 50% confidence. 50% confidence. Or like I say here, if I had to guess, if we had to just guess and give one number, then it's most likely that 0.215% of exposures will exceed our exposure limit. 0.215% of exposures will exceed our exposure limit. Now, I'm not sure, I don't know. If I was going to report something, I guess I would either report this or I might report this number here. Some companies are interested in that 70% confidence interval, and so, or upper confidence limit, and so you may be wanting to report one of these as well. But the point here is that this gives you an idea of the percent of exposures that are greater than your exposure limit. What percent of exposures are greater than your exposure limit? So again, this one could be considered a 50% right there. Our 70% would be 1.03 and our 95%. So let's interpret this one. I have it in blue here. We are 95% confident that no more than 10.5% of exposures will exceed our exposure limit. We talked about our goal being us bringing this number below 5%. We want that number to be below 5%. That would be the same thing as, let me come, well, there's not a perfect correlation to the numbers we see on other graphs provided by Expo Stats. Similar ideas, but there won't be a perfect correlation. So the idea is we want that number to be less than 5%. We're not there with this group of data. I would say that I think this it kind of depends. It kind of depends. Um, I would personally be most interested in this if the 95% if I'm reporting the exceedance fraction, but like I mentioned, other companies and some people or clients may be interested in other values. So I know for some the 70% is a big deal, and maybe some want the point estimate. But I like the 95%. Now, that being said, I don't always report all of these. I don't report everything that we're talking about. We're interpreting so we understand what it means, and then we'll talk about reporting. So really, like I mentioned, these numbers, we won't worry about doing this exercise, but that 8.7% is really the 50% confidence. It's a 50% confidence level. So we can say we're 50% confident that 8.7, 8.8% of exposures will exceed the exposure limit, or 95% confident that no more than 33% of exposures will exceed our exposure limit. So different numbers. We could also report the 70%. If I was going to report this to a client, to a manager, I would pick the one that's important to them and report that if one of them is important. Let me erase my notes here. But again, it's just the wording, the percentages we report, but again, our confidence, it's just that our confidence changes. It's either 50%, 70%, or 95% confident that that percentage will exceed the exposure limit. Again, another example. So 95% confident that no more than 20% of exposures will exceed the exposure limit. We would like that to be 5%. We want that to be 5. So we talked about the 95% UTL and really that's the exposure rating and control category. Which category does that fall in? We talked about the acceptability of our result based on category 4. And then we talked about the exceedance fraction. So I I go back and forth on what is most important, but they're probably most important in this order, with these two being very, very close, a close first and second. Again, this is our exposure rating and control category based on the 95% UTL. And then that acceptability based on category 4 is what I think is the next most important. So let's talk about what do we report to our client. This is just another example of some outputs. Oh, my figures are covering some of the text here. So you get several different figures. Depending on how much sampling you're doing, I wouldn't necessarily include all of the figures or even any of the figures. It just kind of depends. It can kind of I don't know, in my opinion, if you have 20 figures, then it sort of dilutes the value of each figure. So I would report figures for SEGs of particular interest. So for a crew or an SEG where the exposure is very high, or for an SEG that's considered a critical SEG, then I might include some of these figures. But for others, I may just talk about it. So I would definitely report, and again, I don't I have the order flipped here, but I would report which category we're in. What is my exposure rating and control category? Well, for this group, that is category 2. We have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We are in category 2. So I would definitely report that we're in category 2 for our exposure rating and control category. I would report the probability that our 95% UTL exceeds the OEL. That is this number right here. In this case, it happens to be 25.2%. So it shows up in 3 or 4 different places in Expo Stats. It is not hidden by any means. They make it easy to find. So 25.2%, whether we look at it here, or there's another place, they'll show that. So that would be 25.2% probability that our 95% UTL is above our exposure limit. I would definitely report those two things. And the the ERCC is going to help us when we make control recommendations. We're going to talk about that next time. These will definitely help with our control recommendations. And then the last thing that you may consider reporting, I don't always report this, but sometimes I do, is that 95% upper confidence limit for exceedance fraction. You could, like I mentioned before, you could do the 70% or what Expo Stats calls the point estimate, or it's really a 50%. And so let's see, I don't have the example of that here, but what we would say is, you know, we're 95% confident that no more than blank. I'll go back a little bit. This right here. We're 95% confident that no more than 20% of exposures will exceed the exposure limit. You can see that 20% shows up here. It's also in that exposure limit right there, interval, excuse me, confidence interval right there. Anyway, but so I report this number or maybe this number. That number, I don't know. Again, it just depends on what people want, but I would definitely report those top two. Exposure, the category we're in, and this percent right there. What is that? And that's going to drive a lot of our the recommendations that we make for our client. A quick preview for next time. So we're going to look at the control categories and talk about what do you do if, say, you are in category 2, we have these control options. We obviously we're going to have to adapt these to our situation. So I may work in mining, I may work in oil and gas, maybe I work in aviation, maybe I work in manufacturing. I work in different, we all work in different types of environments, work environments. So it may look a little different, but if I guess these first two categories, these are this looks pretty similar across industries, but we're gonna look at our procedures, our SOPs, our practices, our training, our hazard communication. Anyway, we'll talk more about that, and you can see as our as our ERCC, so the rating and control category, as we move down this table or up on the list, then we're going to have to implement more and more controls. Actually, if we're at category 4, we are going to look at everything on this list. And doesn't mean that you're starting from scratch. We may have a great training program, and so we might look at it, but we might not, there may not be much to change there, but maybe we need maybe we need more monitoring. Maybe we should look at medical surveillance. I don't know. But anyway, we'll talk about that more next time. I appreciate your participation, and I'm curious if you have any questions.
So, Mr. Ray, can I have a question, please?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, from your last slide, can you go back to the last slide, please?
Yes.
So, if
Is
on
it
the
this
report,
one?
no, I'm sorry, slide before the next. Okay. So, if we say that on the report, this is categorized as if we just say if 50% of the worker population is potentially have what they call it overexposed, right? So would it be better that if we just say that only 25 point about 25% of population will have overexposed. Because if we say that it is 50%, meaning that the management will interpret that it is the population is quite big to be exposed by 50% of the population. I don't know whether you know my question.
Well, yeah, I guess let me share some thoughts and see if you tell me if I answer your question. So I can see your point, your concern, where if we're saying, because we're focused on this 95% UTL a lot, meaning we want that exceedance fraction to just be 5%. So that could be a more clear. I don't. I'm always learning and trying to improve the way I report. It could be a clearer way of reporting that. So now now I would still let the the ERCC that these categories is going to drive your recommendations, but that could be more in the background, and you could report that exceedance fraction. So, I mean, I would still report the other stuff, but maybe you want to highlight that instead. So I would, I don't remember what the other results were that were associated with this output, but instead of I would still share the category and the probability that our 95% UTL is greater than our OEL, I would still share that. But maybe you highlight this more than that because like I agree that this may be more intuitive for management, for the supervisors or your client, whoever that happens to be, for you to say, well, we're 95% confident that I'm trying to think of a great some when you start throwing out confidence levels and things, some people get intimidated by that. Um,
Yeah, I would say
and
that because if we compare 2.2% compared to 20% is quite big range, right? So
yeah, you're
yeah,
right. You're right.
mm,
And so instead of 95%, maybe you could say you could just use the words that AIHA has. I know that they don't mean it for this context, but to say, oh, we're very confident that let's see, that no more than 20% of our exposures are above our exposure limit, something like that. You may have somewhere else that clarifies what that means, but in the main body or in your summary, you simplify it so that it's a little bit uh, intimidating is not the right word, but just a simpler explanation in the summary, and later you can clarify what that means. But I agree. I agree that I think I think you're right. Um, and so maybe I should um, prioritize exceedance fraction a little bit more than I do. Um, these are they help drive those recommendations, but the client may be more interested in knowing this, to your point.
okay, yeah, thank you. So in the next session, you will provide information on how to interpret that if what next if the category 4 is more than 5%, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah, we'll talk
Okay,
about that. Yep. So
okay, yeah, yeah.
so it'll mostly be based on these ratings and but like we said, if it's tolerable or unacceptable, we are definitely going to include periodic exposure monitoring. We want to make sure we collect some more data so we have a little bit more confidence about where we're really at with our exposures.
Okay, so meaning that, in other words, if we have like say let's say the cat for is more than 5%, doesn't mean that our monitoring some active our monitoring is not right. We
Um,
just
let's say if it's more than 5%, what? Well, so there's not
I mean
necessarily.
yeah.
So let's say that I mean this is a good example. So it's 25%.
Mm-hmm.
25% chance that our
It's
the
more
95th
right. Yeah.
percentile is is in that category. What that there are well, so there are different ways that we can get a better number. Let's put it that way. That we can get a better number. So we can control our exposures so that more exposures, they move this way on the graph. We could do that. That's one way. Another way is by taking more samples. So I don't know if this is helpful, but I like to look at this. So when you look at a confidence interval, you have your I'm not going to show the whole equation, but you have your mean, standard deviation, and the number of samples. Standard deviation is a measure of variability, and the more samples you take, well, this number goes up, and assuming the variability from your initial surveys is similar, let's say it's similar. Um, this may stay the same. It could go up or down. I guess this number could go up or down, your standard deviation as you take samples. But the N will come up for sure. We know that and because you have more samples, so that the number of samples comes up, that makes your interval smaller overall, your confidence interval. So, this is the equation for it's not the exact equation that we'd use in this case, but it's just to demonstrate. It'd be similar. So as the number of samples comes up, the confidence interval comes down. So instead of being this wide, it's more like this. And you would see this in these bars as well. It wouldn't look like the lines I have, but let's pretend that the real 95% UTL is right here. So let's say about 60% of our OEL. The true 95% UTL is right there. As we take samples, what's going to happen is, right now it kind of looks like this. This is going to get pulled closer. The variability or the range decreases and it gets tighter. It gets tighter and more focused on where the real UTL is. And I'm trying to remember what your question was now. I think I know it was about taking more samples, but I don't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah. I mean the if the result, let's say more than 35% in category 4, doesn't mean that the method that we are using for taking samples or the way we taking sample is not right. Right.
Oh, correct,
Right.
correct. Yeah, sorry. I guess
Yeah.
that was
Mm.
I got off on I was not hitting the target there. So correct. So we the this analysis doesn't tell us anything about how we're sampling. We need to make sure that we're using good methods and a validated approach. Um, and assuming we are, then these tools are going to be very helpful and going to get us close to the real number. We're not going to know exactly. It's all based on probabilities, as you can see, but we're going to get closer and closer to knowing where the real 95th percentile is.
Mm. Okay. But uh, because we are in the industry, right? We are not the scientists or collecting all the data, right? So in terms of uh, practicability, so is there any like limit to how long or how many samples that we will take for the certain of task?
So not necessarily, but um, taking samples is good, but it can only get you so far. So like I said, I had the SD and our X, and then we have our N down here. So if our true 95th percentile is right here, we'll just say UTL, but if the real one is right here, taking more samples will help us, shrink the interval that we're considering. So it'll get closer and closer and closer to where we're pretty confident about where it is, but it doesn't change where it is. The way that we change where this is by implementing controls. And so let's see if I want to make sure I answer your question. Um,
Yeah,
so
probably
so
yeah,
oh, is
yeah,
there is there a limit on the number of samples?
yeah.
Um, really, when so you don't have to around 25. Um, you don't really need to use these tools, the exposure decision analysis. You can use more traditional statistics. Once the number of samples is around 25, then you can start to use other tools with some confidence. That doesn't mean that um well, I guess that is what it is.
Mm,
But one other thing to keep in mind is NIOSH has run the numbers, and once you hit an N of 50, then there's really no point I mean, you still want to take samples every once in a while, but if you have 50 samples for an exposure group and nothing has changed in terms of process and equipment, et cetera, work practices in the span of time that those 50 samples were taken, taking another sample isn't going to help really in terms of confidence, in terms of better understanding. If you're at an N of 50, you have a really good grasp on where things are. You're going to have high confidence. So those are not, I guess those are magic numbers in a way. Um, but in term outside of that, there's not a magic number that I have, except for I guess this is on the high end. On the low end, NIOSH does have magic numbers of either 6 or 12, depending on what you're wanting to do. It would be a good idea to try to get to 6 or 12 because of the statistics you can start to do with the data. Those are sort of magic numbers on the low end of, a low sample number. So try to get, you know, I would say try to get into, above 10 or 12 samples. But if I already had 25, I would not feel a huge urgency to try and reach 50. You could slow down. But I guess I'd say you could slow down depending on what your analysis shows you.
mm. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Reed.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you both. I appreciate you coming, and I hope you have a great week. I'll post some updates about my mistake and week 5.
Thank you. Hope you're getting well soon. Thank you very much.
Thank, thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye bye.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Bye.